I've never seen Putin this nervous, in as much of a pickle. Ukraine's forces have broken through Russian lines. And the radicals at home who want to subjugate Ukraine with fire are squealing about the fleeing Russian army. In a sign of how badly Putin is losing the war, he has threatened nuclear war and ordered partial mobilization of reservists to go and fight in Ukraine. In this video, we're gonna see that partial mobilization is a lie, a fig leaf, just an opaque step along Putin's journey of balancing wanting a passive and an activated population at the same time. Unless Putin is prepared to use nuclear weapons to keep power or even stay alive, he may well need to escalate his partial mobilization, telling Russians to go and fight. But here's the problem. This is Putin's base. Over the years, he's kept them out of politics, and their absence from politics is what guarantees Putin's regime's stability. They passively support the war, but they don't want to fight. They are couch warriors. Politically, Putin needs them on the couch. Militarily, he needs them in Ukraine. In this video, we'll explore the extraordinary surreal drama playing out as Putin grapples with this remarkable dilemma he's created for himself, which he could either muddle through or which could end his reign. This is Prigozhin, the man called Putin's chef. Prigozhin is a confidant of Putin's, and he runs the Wagner Group, which is a state-backed private army mercenary group that operates in Ukraine, in Syria, in Africa. In this video, we're gonna see Prigozhin is on a tour of prisons and penal colonies. Prigozhin's deal is 6 months of service in Ukraine, and if you survive and don't run away, in which case you'll be executed, you're then pardoned and set free. That's a promise, not a guarantee.
Война тяжелая, на всякие там чеченские и так далее. Близко не похоже. У меня есть в ЧВК самолеты, есть РСЗО, есть танки, есть все, что необходимо. Через полгода уходите домой, получив помилование. Те, кто приезжает и в первый день говорит, куда-то я не туда попал, мы делаем отметку дезертир, и после этого следует расстрел. Я вас живыми забираю. Но не всегда живыми возвращаю.
Russia has tried to attack Ukraine with its army, and now it's going to try to attack Ukraine with a prison. But let's just reflect on this properly. Imagine if Britain were gathering up convicts to attack France. How nuts this is. It shows a desperate need for manpower. It shows a mafioso quality to the Russian state. And we've got to be clear, if this were a country with free media and that was happening in it, then that would be the most poetic demonstration you could imagine of military catastrophe. And this illustrates the extraordinary emptiness of Putin's colonial project. What is he offering Ukraine? Except violence and poorly glued together remnants of fascist rhetoric. This is Ramzan Kadyrov, the dictator of Chechnya. And by the way, Chechnya is a part of Russia in which the Kremlin does not have monopoly over organized violence. Kadyrov has his own army too, and you'd probably know them as the TikTok warriors because they're incessantly filming themselves when they are not in danger. Kadyrov has called for every governor in Russia to gather up men from somewhere in some way. Now, of course, there's a proposal that the Kremlin hate, but because they need Kadyrov, he's not in danger for making it. So we've got Prigozhin's convicts and mercenaries, then we've got Kadyrov's TikTok warriors, then we've got Zolotov's National Guard, which is a sort of riot police force, and they were the guys who were incinerated with their batons on the way to police a protest with which apparently the Russian invasion, in their view, was going to be met in Kiev. Then we've got the main Russian army, and they also were coming into Ukraine in February expecting a parade, and many of them even booked restaurants in Kiev to celebrate. And then we've got the FSB and the other agencies who to a good extent despise one another and despise all of the above listed armies. Now, if there was a divine hand in all of this, then you could say that some malign demon was prepping Russia for a potential future messy civil war. But that's for the future. Today, the main heat coming onto the regime is not from the military or from the agencies or from the opposition. It's from the ultra-nationalist, Z-loving pro-war party. Now, you're not allowed to criticize the war in Russia or even call it a war. Or are you? You see, if you're the opposition and you're against Putin and against this war, then you're silenced. But if you are pro-war but think the government is not going far enough or it's incompetently prosecuting the war, then you can criticize it. And moreover, you can say, the hell with this special military operation. Let's do a proper war and mobilize the country. Now here is Mr. Girkin or Mr. Strelkov, and here's an ex-FSB guy who played the leading role in the annexation of Crimea and in the Russian incursion into the Donbass.
Виновно в этом поражении Министерство обороны и Генеральный штаб. Еще парочка оскорбительных военных поражений, и вот мы получаем ту самую революционную ситуацию. Я уверен, что в случае поражения Российской Федерации вариант с Саддамом Хусейновичем и Каддафи Муаммаром, он тоже не исключен. Не надо это самое Владимиру Владимировичу испытывать иллюзий. Не факт, что он не будет показательно унасекомлен не так, как сдавшийся Милошевич.
And he's interesting because his beliefs are just radical, extremist, genocidal lunacy, but he is actually the most coherent and consistent commentator on the pro-war side you're going to find in Russia.
Украина, так называемая, это Россия. Превратить часть России из-за собственной бездарности, тупости, безответственности и продажности в ядерную пустыню? Нет. Давайте попробуем мобилизацию провести сначала. Не говоря уже о том, что стоит нам применить ядерное оружие, мы откроем ящик Пандоры. И против нас тут же Украине передадут ядерное оружие, и она против нас его применит.
So of course what's weird isn't that this is going on. What's weird rather is that this is being allowed and even encouraged by the Kremlin. Let's look at more of it. Here is Mr. Dugin, the philosophizing radical pro-war activist whose daughter Daria Dugin was recently killed in a car bomb. Here is what Mr. Dugin has to say after Ukraine's breakthrough counteroffensive. The special military operation is over. This is war. Which is, of course, a crime in Russia to say that.
Опять же война, вернее, спецоперация.
Punishable by up to 15 years. It's time for mobilization of society. And we are now in World War III and we have to accept things as they are. So what is going on here? It's two things. First of all, these people actually could get silenced or even imprisoned or killed. Here is Peskov, Putin's spokesperson, warning these hardline radicals. As for the other points of view, critical points of view, as long as they remain within the framework of the current legislation, this is pluralism. But the line is very, very thin. You have to be very careful here. But second, the regime actually wants these messages out there. Why does it want them? Because it wants to saturate the informational environment with multiple different and contradictory messages about mobilization. Because then it wants to test, to poll the population and see where they're at on all of that messaging. And they've even introduced some liberal anti-war messaging too in small doses. You may have seen this guy recently, Boris Nadezhdin, who was calling for peace on national state propaganda TV. So what is going on here? Some Western journalists showing professional deficiency called this rumblings of discontent. But in fact, they were nothing of the kind. They were Russian propaganda machinery just doing its thing. Nadezhdin is a guy with oppositional views who compromised himself and delivered himself into the hands of the fake opposition in Russia, that in fact acts as a kind of prop for the Putin regime, and their job's to go on the telly and say critical things without criticizing Putin himself and get pilloried and shot down by everybody else else on the shelf. Now, what's interesting here isn't that Nadezhdin is calling for peace. He's supposed to say that that's his job. He's not changed his mind about anything or got disillusioned by the war. What's interesting here is that he is being strategically elevated so that the peace position can be sounded out, so that afterwards the regime can poll the population and see how they're reacting to it, so they can orientate themselves a little bit about how to deal with this population that they have to manipulate into whatever they want to do next. So where are the Russian people in this? Well, experts disagree exactly about how to balance the three buckets the Russian people fall into. So let's go with the balance offered by Greg Dugin, who is a wonderful political scientist and political philosopher. First, there are the radicals, who are 15 to 25% of the population, an extremely loud minority that actively supports the war, is engaged, follows the news, and in rare cases even goes to the front lines. This is the audience of the pro-war bloggers, the Telegram channels, and vampire propagandists like Solovyov and Skabeva. Second, there are the dissenters. They're 20 to 25% of the population, a sizable minority that categorically opposes the war. It is banned from Russian-based media and generally depressed. Third, there are the laypersons, who are 50 to 65% of the population, a passive majority that's completely depoliticized and doesn't want to have anything to do with politics or with the war. Now, are these three buckets static, or is there a trend taking each of them somewhere? Well, I think there are a couple of trends. One we've already seen. The ultra-radicals are getting more agitated. But the key trend that's palpable now is that that middle group, the depoliticized 50 to 65%, are getting increasingly bored. Yes, bored, not outraged, by the war. They are getting more disinterested, getting more fatigued by the war as a news story. So now to Putin's dilemma. At the start of the video, I said that unless Putin wants to use nuclear weapons, he's going to have to look at significant mobilization of the population if he is to avoid a humiliating defeat. Putin's attempting to ease Russia into this gradually, calling for the mobilization of a supposedly real 300,000 reservists. Putin is lying. There is no there with this proposal. Let's define it for us. Partial mobilization means whatever the regime wants it to mean, from calling up reservists and key professionals to calling up any percentage of men they can catch. Here is how to think about this. It's a big stepping stone along Putin's way of trying to balance how to have both a passive and an activated population. The regime will hope that this is one step toward mobilization, with more steps becoming possible in the future. But I've got an important message for you, and that's that before there are any other steps, Russia has to be mobilized politically first. You can't just mobilize with a flick of a switch. And one thing I'm very comfortable to say to you as a political philosopher is that Putin, in fact, can't mobilize Russia. Even if it were organizationally possible and militarily useful, he can't mobilize the country and send many more Russians to the front without first politically mobilizing the country. Political mobilization has to come first before military mobilization. If he does it the other way around, it's not going to work, and it's going to existentially threaten his role. And this takes us to Russia's totalitarian turn, which it took after the war began. But that turn went only about 20% of the way. And then Russia didn't quite stop, but continued to travel in a totalitarian direction at the rate of 0.25 percentage point a month. That rate needs to radically increase if Putin is going to get himself into a position where he is able to ask his population to partake in mass forced mobilization. Now, why is that? It's because the Putin regime has got an informal deal with the people. The people say, look, Mr. Putin, we're going to outsource politics to you. You can start wars, you can stop wars, you can do whatever the hell you like. But there are two things you can't do. You can't take away our possibility to subsist, and you can't take possession of our bodies. You can't ask us to die for your politics that you're doing out there. And if you begin to break these two elements of the deal that we've got, Mr. Putin, then the whole system might collapse, because our perception of the legitimacy of this whole enterprise is that the regime stays out of our lives to that extent. It's not going to ask us to die for it, and it's not going to take possession of our lives and send us to the front or to some kind of labor camp. So is he breaking the deal? Yes, he is breaking the deal with his people on which the stability of his regime is predicated. A bit. Quite a bit. What he's already done will cause great resentment and a sharp decline in his perceived legitimacy. But he's not breaking the deal all the way. He's leaving himself room for maneuver and room to get lucky. Putin will hope that further escalation, up to but hopefully not including the use of non-strategic nuclear weapons, will allow him to reverse this decline in legitimacy. He'll hope to benefit from events and opportunities to come. For instance, the recognition of Ukrainian territories as Russian territories, and the exploitation of that to tell Russians that they're closer to being in a full-scale war. But even if such opportunities arise, the point is, Putin no longer looks invincible to anybody, including his own supporters. And that's really significant, because Putin is, while of course an illegitimate president, he is the only political institution in Russia with perceived legitimacy. And so when he begins to wobble, the whole system begins to wobble. The war introduced a crack into the regime. Regimes like Putin's, informational autocracies, hybrid authoritarian regimes, are not meant to fight real wars. They're meant to fight hybrid wars, the kind of wars that you can retire from the news cycle at will. And they've found out that this war, you can't retire from the news cycle, no matter how much you saturate the information environment with propaganda. And forced mass mobilization, if it's done on a large enough scale, will almost inevitably introduce another crack into the regime. And this matters to us all, not just because Ukraine matters and Russian aggression matters, but because the Putin regime, with cracks and tears and in a corner, will be looking to explore the possibility of using non-strategic nuclear weapons. And that means we'd be moving to a crisis of nuclear escalation. And meanwhile, we're going to be hearing a lot more from those Z-loving radicals who want to escalate a genocidal war against Ukraine at all costs. One of them is Alexander Dugin. And to understand more about Dugin and the car bomb attack that took his daughter's life, beyond some of the misrepresentations and caricatures in Western commentary, watch this video next.